8:55 p.m. Eastern Daylight Saving Time. The Columbia Broadcasting System and its affiliated stations present every evening at this time the news and Elmer Davis.
With almost all of Poland overrun by Germans and Russians and the Polish government driven across the Romanian frontier, Warsaw this afternoon was still holding out and may be holding out still. A report from Budapest just received said that the Warsaw radio was silenced at 4:10 this afternoon, New York time, in the midst of a broadcast describing fighting around the city. Of course, this may mean only that the radio station has been struck by a shell or an air bomb. And so long as Warsaw holds out, German and Russian talk of the end of Poland, even a temporary end, is premature. 2 days ago, you remember, the German High Command demanded the surrender of the city, threatening that otherwise the whole area would be treated as a battlefront. The time limit given for surrender seems to have been extended more than once, perhaps to give time for the evacuation of civilians, perhaps in the hope that when the garrison of Warsaw heard that their whole country had been overrun, that their government had been driven into foreign parts and was no longer functioning, they would wonder what there was left to fight for. Well, the Poles in Warsaw seem to have given the answer, their own self-respect. It seems impossible that they can hold out very long. Apparently, they are encircled by greatly superior numbers of German troops. But when the history of this war comes to be written, they are going to receive a citation for distinguished courage and resolution against utterly hopeless odds. Otherwise, the war on the Eastern Front seems to be about over. That is, this war. The Paris radio reports that Polish and Russian troops are fraternizing in eastern Poland, and the American military attaché in Romania tells the same story. Whether his is an eyewitness report or just based on other reports, we don't know. The Germans, on the other hand, say that Russian and German soldiers have met at Brest-Litovsk and are getting along like old friends and brothers. Both of these stories could conceivably be true, of course, of different units of the Russian army. It would certainly be premature to expect any early clash between the Germans and Russians over division of the spoils, and it may never happen at all. But don't forget that Russia has mobilized 4.5 million men. No such enormous army was needed to crush the scattered and broken remnants of the Polish forces in the eastern provinces. Russia has those troops on hand in case they may be needed for something else. Those of you who heard Major George Fielding Elliott on this network at 6:45 will remember that he said that Stalin is playing nobody's hand but his own. At present, it certainly suits his interest to play ball with Hitler, but he will do that no longer than it suits his interest, and Hitler knows that as well as anybody else. As Major Elliott remarked, even if the Germans can move considerable forces to the west, they can't afford to neglect their eastern frontier just because the Polish war may soon be over. Today, the German newspapers printed an inspired statement that the German and Russian governments had agreed that, quote, the Polish state from the moment of its creation lacked the essential conditions of statehood and collapsed through its own incompetence, end quote. Well, what are these essential conditions of national existence that Poland lacked, as demonstrated by the disasters of the last 2 weeks? Airplanes, tanks, and heavy artillery. Now, it is a matter of cold fact that in the times we live in, these are essential conditions of national independence. But that's not why the Germans and Russians are giving out this statement just now. Like the stories in the controlled Russian press about the mistreatment of minorities in Poland, like the German propaganda about Polish atrocities just before the war began, these were appeals to moral justification. So it is clear that even in totalitarian countries where people believe what they are told, or at least must act as if they believed it, it is still worthwhile to do what an American politician once called pandering to the moral element of the public. Nobody knows how this war will turn out or how much will be left of European civilization after it is over. It is possible that this is the last war in which these appeals to moral justification will be found necessary. But they are at least a proof that there is still something that can be called a world conscience, even if it doesn't appear to be functioning very effectively just now.
This 5-minute program, The News and Elmer Davis, is brought to you by Columbia and its affiliated stations nightly at 8:55 o'clock.
Official sources give the number as 150.